Hi there, my name is Tammy Hartline, and I'm doing this code review for a CS340 program that I'm going to be enhancing for my capstone at SNHU. The program that was created for CS340 was an interactive dashboard that used Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Dash, Plotly Express, I believe, Python, CRUD, Mongo database, and Mongosh. Uh, Most of the database interactions and functionality was done using our shell. The program was initially done on a completely structured, already set up environment. I believe it was Ubuntu virtual environment that we can no longer access. So when I was initially doing my enhancement plan, I needed to make sure I could actually run this program on my device since I couldn't do it from that same virtual desktop, which proved to be quite challenging. um, but I was eventually able to get everything worked out and the dependencies updated to where they weren't clashing with one another and unable to function due to versions that were not compatible with others. So that was a bit complicated, but I eventually was able to get it to go through, and it actually kind of helped inspire my enhancement plan because the file we work with, where all the data is stored, is a single CSV file for Austin Animal Shelter. And it just seems like a normal database storage system isn't really, it's overkill basically. Like it's too much for a single file, where instead you could use SQLite, and which is more of just a file storage database structure. And I liked that better. I think it's more cost efficient as well, and will optimize the program, ultimately helping it run better. So that is probably the biggest change about the program, is going to be redoing my queries and updating them to be more optimized and to use SQLite instead of Mongo database and Mongosh from Bash, and as well as using, I did not previously use Git with the CS340 submission. So I have come to really appreciate version control. So that will definitely be one of the enhancements as well as taking the program overall and converting it from a Jupyter Notebook to Python. And so it will all basically be in Python with some HTML for our dashboards and the interactivity and our buttons and filtering sections. It does have geomapping, but it can be improved because the functionality of it serves no purpose, not really, because all of them are located in this same animal shelter. So when you click on it, it just tells you, like if you hover, it says it's a dog, and it tells you what breed it is, and its location is pinned, to the same place every time, so there's not really a point in having that map there. So that's some of the enhancements, as well as what I would call code cleanup, and removing some of that just non-essential, non-helpful, non-relevant functionality of the dashboard and the program. So I'm going to be turning it into an online application instead of one that could only be run locally. So previously we used Jupyter Notebook to pull it up on a local server. But outside of that virtual device, you can't pull it up. So I am going to create a virtual server, a live web server using Render. I have actually already created it, but deployment of the application when it is complete to the live server, we will see how that goes when we get there. So to get started, I'm just going to pull up, to start with, my CRUD file. So CRUD meaning create, read, update, and delete. And I want to go over first the structure and answer the questions of, does it completely and correctly implement the design? Does it conform to any pertinent coding standards? Is it well structured, consistent? Any uncalled for, unneeded procedures, unreachable code, leftover stubs, test routines, and code be replaced by calls to external reusable components or library functions, any blocks of repeated code, storage used efficient, symbolics used rather than magic numbers, excessively complex information. So I can answer most of these really quickly and go from there through the code. Yes, it completely and correctly implements the design. It does follow coding standards like best practices. It is very well structured, very consistent in style and formatted. There are some uncalled for and unneeded procedures, none that are unreachable, but yes, there are definitely uncalled for and unneeded ones, as well as leftover testing results. No, I don't believe there's any that can be replaced by calls to external reusable components because those were created. No repeated code. Storage use is overly efficient, I believe, hence the enhancement for that. Don't think I used any constants in the code, and it is quite likely that is excessively complex because that's how I do everything, is by making it way too difficult. So to show you what I mean on that, here we have our animal shelter file, which is our Python file for our modules. So we've got the initialization connection. And then as you can see, the naming is very self-explanatory. So we have user, password, host, port, DB, and column. Now I do have an issue with this because I just said column, and that's not what that was. It is for collection, not column. So I wish that I had just named this collection instead of COL. Because as you can see here, I do have client database collection. And then I've got DB and COL. So instead, I could have even just put COLL to separate it out. That way I didn't associate it with column. But that is one naming convention that I'm not fond of, me choosing that as its short name. Then we have create one, which does exactly as you would expect. It implements the C in CRUD for create, and it would create or insert one row into our structure. And then we have the create many, which is where you could enter in many rows. And then I do check to see if nothing is to save. That way it's not just continuously running and there's no like other thing for it to do if it doesn't meet that criteria. So then we have our read method, and this one was a little bit different because we were required to create rescue breeds based off of the dog breed type. So we had water, mountain, disaster rescue breeds. And I also created an unknown. That way it would handle other breeds. And then categorizing the results. Then we have our update method, same thing, to where it should give you the update options of either update one or update many. And then our delete. So, in the same thing, delete many or delete one. And everything here looks good. I love that about Python, the structure of and formatting being like the only way to get it to work. Makes me really like Python, even though I am more proficient with C and C++ and Java. I'm finding more and more appreciation for Python because of its simplistic structure and for it to be as powerful as it is, given it being format based. So then here I have my testing, which was just to make sure that the animal shelter class was initiated. And then here's the insertion data where I'm testing to make sure that our methods work. As you can tell, like I do tend to over-comment things. Update queries, update datas. And again, I mean, yes, that is pretty, I think, standard to name something data or datas. But I think I could have done better with that. I'm not fond of the data term either. Even if instead I had done update test data or update test query, I think anything more descriptive for me personally is better because it does eliminate my need for excessive comments. Same thing with deleted. And then my if and else statements are all aligned properly, called in the logical order that they're supposed to be. And that all looks well and good. And then now I want to go to the main file, and this is where I'm going to go over some of the main issues with the code. Now, my enhancements don't really involve anything significant as far as like that was wrong with the program because there wasn't much wrong at all other than like if I scroll down here, there's this where I, instead of just testing using, trying to get it to pull, I don't know, the first 5 or 10 rows, I had it pull all of them, trying to determine what the issue was because at first I was having a hard time getting it to output the data table. So I started testing it, getting everything and pulling everything. That way I could make sure it was working how it was intended. Outside of that, this all looks good. It's structured very well. Here's my HTML section that I had mentioned. I have a couple of these. I did do some extra filtering that was probably unnecessary and unneeded. all that was required for the assignment was to do these filters. So the rescue filter with the animal or dog rescue type. But instead, I did the radio button rescue filter. I did animal type button filters. I did column text box search filters, total breed count, um, extra hover functionality, display, and some other stuff to where I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit, realizing what all can be done. Because I do love HTML and just the functionality of being able to really customize and create something unique from nothing but words and typing. Um, and I kind of get sidetracked. But as you can tell here, there's way too many comments. So I do need to go in and clean a lot of that up, such as setting up the Jupyter version of Dash, configure the necessary Python module imports for dashboard components, configure OS routines. I don't think there's a need to necessarily go line by line and explain everything, but there is some method to this madness. So as you can tell, this code ended up being almost 3,500 lines long. And so with that, I wanted to be able to have keywords that I can then hit Control F and search what I'm looking for, such as if I wanted to just update something to do with my CRUD functionality. It looks like I've only got that in here twice. But this would be a good way for me to find something quickly if I'm needing to access it or edit it for any reason. So I try and remember whatever I think I would have used as a keyword for each section. And I do go a bit overboard with the comments instead of just a keyword because I want to make sure I remember why I'm looking for it and if there was anything off about it when I was programming it. Okay, now everything is placed in a logical order. All of my import statements are up at the top, and then I do my login information and the server setup right here, all grouped together, called the data frame. This was just part of the assignment that was automatically there. Then I set up my unique animal types. That way I can do make sure that there's no duplicates being pulled in for my filters. The header and the photo setup, buttons for the animal types, and as well as the rescue types. And then here's the data table and the breed count that I mentioned earlier, which was not a required functionality. And then the graph and map. So I'm going to remove the map because it is also an unneeded aspect, because when you hover over the map, the pin is always in the same place because it is at the animal shelter. But when you hover over it instead and you have selected a specific animal in the data table, it will tell you dog and then the breed when you hover over the pin. So yeah, it's basically just something extra that really wasn't needed and that can be removed. And then all of this to the point of where I had to like reset the or not reset, but redistribute and up the output because it kept giving me an error. But it did come in handy towards the bottom. Yeah, because it's a lot, like a whole lot. Come on. Okay. So if you look right here, you can see that my test cases actually did work. So my testing would have been for creating, and this is my dog, and then for reading, so probably the dog one, and then updating, which would have been, where did it go? Pup, age 1, and then deleting would have been pup, age 2. And all of them did work functionality wise. I just continuously was testing exceedingly too much. And because I wasn't checking it here, even though I had it output a message to the screen that said, you successfully added, and then it would list whatever options I entered in for the record. I wasn't positive, so I kept adding it, thinking that it would output it here and it didn't until I actually output the whole table. So this can be gotten rid of now. And then we have our callbacks for updating the breed count. Again, total breeds is not really, there's almost 11,000, I think. So there's not really a purpose that this serves when there's likely other data that's better serving and more insightful than how many breed types there are. Because instead, I think maybe comparing like how many come in sick and got well even, or did they die of natural causes, or did they end up having to get euthanized? I mean, I think there is probably some insightful data in here that was just not considered as part of the assignment, or maybe my knowledge wasn't quite where it is now to where I would even think to check for other things outside the scope of the assignment. And then here, if selected rescue type is in the rescue types, just add 1, which is just initializing the count variable, and then updating the dashboard. Again, everything looks well structured, very well documented, almost to the extreme, I know. And then update the plot, total rescue dogs, a copy of the data frame for each data point, and then the bubble plot. And that is basically it. So I want to go back here now. And is the code adequately documented? Absolutely. Are there comments consistent? Yes. Properly defined with clear names. All but I think 2 that could have been better. All variables have very consistent types. No redundant or unused variables. There is some unused testing that's left over. Doesn't compare floating points. It doesn't have any rounding errors. It avoids additions and subtractions on numbers with greatly different magnitudes. No need for divisors tested for 0 or noise. All loops and branches are correct. My if, else, if, and else statements and chains and cases are all good as far as I could tell. Yes, and every case or if statement has a default. Loop termination conditions, obvious. I think so. All of this seems to be good. Same thing with indexes and pointers. Testing for validity. Output variables assigned. Yes. Okay, yeah. So I think for the most part, everything here was addressed in the review, and there are improvements that can be made, like outside of the enhancements. So before we actually start enhancing the program. But I think the main thing for me is going to be swapping from Mongo database to SQLite, deploying it to a live server, cleaning up the code a bit, swapping the Jupyter Notebook over to Python. And then I also have here a video of the current functionality of the application. So this was recorded in October when I submitted this assignment. And as you can see, you click on the link and it takes you to the local server and it pulls up the header, the photo. These were all the extra filters. Same thing with each column. You could type in whatever your search was and it would filter out for whatever you had typed in. The functionality gets a little wonky when you select one of these. So when you select one of the buttons, the all, cat, dog, other, bird, and livestock, the data table stays populated. But as you select one of the rescue types, the data table collapses. I liked it better with it collapsed, but my instructor did not. And because all of my other functionality was non-mandatory, the fact that the data table was not present when this was populated meant that I got a 0 for that portion. So it was a valuable lesson as far as don't just assume that because you think something is better that the client will agree. And before you go to changing things such as the specific functionality, maybe check with the client and make sure that's what they want. So it was a very tough lesson that I highly disputed, but I can understand, other than like I did have that functionality with the other filters, but because they were not part of the assignment, he said he could not consider those and could only consider these. So, I mean, I understood. But as you can tell, I mean, I think this was the data we were supposed to use, but it's not really insightful. So, for example, your filters here are breed, and when you select one, it just takes it off the list. And because there are so many, I think it would have made more sense to instead have animal type here, because there's only 5 or 6 of those, whereas there's, like I said, almost 11,000 breeds. Or I'm sorry, 10,013 total breeds. Again, there, see, when you hover, it says Austin Animal Shelter and then dog, Labrador, Retriever mix. I don't think that's really contributing anything to the project or product. So I will probably actually just remove that from the functionality. But this was the final working result, and I definitely think it has potential. But I also think that significant enhancements can be made to not just make it function better, but to also make it more consistent with coding standards and with just project standards in general. Because if you have a product, I mean, you want it to be as beneficial and useful as you can. So, and that is all for my code review. So, thank you.